Imagine you're sitting around a fire. It's 50,000 BC. You haven't showered in your entire life. You've never heard of a doctor, a dentist, a warning label. Your life expectancy is roughly 35 years, and you are, against all reasonable odds, completely fine with this. And then the wind shifts. Smoke rolls directly into your face, thick, choking, eye-watering smoke from whatever's burning in that fire. And instead of moving, instead of doing the obvious, sensible thing that every other animal on Earth would do, something in your brain goes, wait, what if I did that again? That one moment of spectacularly bad judgment may be the reason humanity has never been able to stop. And the story of how we got from that campfire to a $900 billion global industry is stranger, older, and darker than anything you've been told. Because here's what nobody tells you about smoking. It doesn't start with tobacco. It doesn't start with colonial trade ships crossing the Atlantic or Native American ceremonies or even the first intentional crop. The urge to inhale smoke, that specific, bizarre, counterintuitive behavior of voluntarily breathing burning plant matter, might be wired into us at a level so deep it predates civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. And the evidence for this is genuinely insane. Before we can talk about smoking, we have to talk about fire, because without fire, there is no smoke, and fire is older than you probably think. The oldest confirmed evidence of controlled fire used by human ancestors dates back roughly 1 million years. The site is called Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, and what archaeologists found there wasn't the result of wildfire or a lightning strike. They found burnt bone and plant ash inside a cave, concentrated and consistent in a way that only happens when someone is maintaining a fire deliberately. The species responsible wasn't even Homo sapiens. It was Homo erectus, our earlier ancestor, with a smaller brain, heavier brow ridges, and absolutely no interest in what anyone thought of them. They sat around fires every single day. They cooked with them. They stayed warm, and they breathed smoke. Every single day. For hundreds of thousands of years, every human and pre-human ancestor who sat near a fire inhaled smoke as a basic fact of existence. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a habit. It was just the air. But here's where it gets interesting, because not all smoke is the same. When you burn organic matter, wood, leaves, bark, roots, you don't just get carbon dioxide and water vapor. Depending on what's burning, you get a chemical cocktail, alkaloids, terpenes, psychoactive compounds that interact with the human nervous system in ways that are, let's say, noticeable. Some plants, when they burn, release chemicals that make you feel different, calmer, lighter, more focused, or in some cases, dramatically, vividly, cosmically altered. In the forests and grasslands where our ancestors lived, they were full of these plants, cannabis species, wild nicotiana, the genus that tobacco belongs to, various psychoactive herbs that grow naturally across Africa, Asia, and Europe. These weren't rare or exotic, they were just part of the landscape. Which means that at some point, nobody knows exactly when, nobody planned it, nobody wrote it down, one of our ancestors sat downwind of the wrong bush, breathed in the smoke from something interesting, and felt their brain do something it had never done before. And they had absolutely no idea why. But they remembered the feeling, and the next time that plant was burning, they sat a little closer. The human brain has receptors that are specifically responsive to cannabinoids, the compounds found in cannabis. These receptors didn't evolve because of cannabis. They're part of our endocannabinoid system, which regulates everything from mood to memory to appetite to pain response. But the fact that they exist means that, when a human first inhaled smoke from a burning cannabis plant, their brain wasn't confused. Their brain said, "Oh, hello, I've been waiting for you." In that moment, that first accidental hit of psychoactive smoke around a prehistoric campfire may be the true origin point of all of it. Not a decision, not a plan, just a very pleasant accident that kept getting repeated until repetition became habit, and habit became culture, and culture became civilization. Think about that for a second. The entire multi-trillion-dollar global tobacco industry, the centuries of ritual, the wars fought over trade routes, the addiction that grips 1 billion people alive right now, All of it may trace back to a tired hunter sitting downwind of the wrong plant and having an unexpectedly excellent afternoon. History is sometimes beautiful in the most completely absurd ways. Now let's talk about what the physical evidence actually tells us, and why it almost certainly understates how old this really is. The oldest direct physical evidence of intentional cannabis use comes from a burial site in the Pamir Mountains of Central Asia, dating to approximately 500 BC. Excavators found wooden braziers containing superheated stones alongside cannabis residue with unusually high THC content, not wild hemp used for rope or food. High-potency cannabis, deliberately burned in a ritual context involving the dead. 500 BC, that's 2,500 years ago. But here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind right now. Does the absence of older evidence mean it didn't happen earlier, or does it just mean we haven't found the proof yet? Because organic material, seeds, leaves, plant fiber, wooden pipes, almost never survives thousands of years in the ground, we find stone tools from 3 million years ago because stone is essentially indestructible, but a leather pouch filled with dried herbs that dissolved back into the earth centuries before any archaeologist picked up a trowel. The absence of evidence here is emphatically not evidence of absence. There's also what historians call the Herodotus problem. Herodotus, the ancient Greek historian, writing in the 5th century BC, described something he personally witnessed among the Scythians, a nomadic culture from the Asian steppe. He wrote that they would set up small enclosed tents, heat stones until they glowed white, throw hemp seeds directly onto those stones, then sit inside the tent and inhale the vapor. He described them, and this is a direct quote from a man who was clearly trying very hard to remain professional, howling with pleasure. For centuries, historians assumed he was exaggerating. Then archaeologists started excavating Scythian burial mounds, and they found bronze braziers, stones, hemp residue, exactly what Herodotus described, preserved in burial contexts across the Eurasian steppe. He wasn't embellishing. He was, if anything, underselling it. The man watched a group of ancient Central Asians hotbox a tent with hemp seed on superheated rocks, and he wrote it down as accurately as he could, and people spent 2,000 years assuming he made it up. The lesson, when ancient historians describe something that sounds implausible, check the archaeology before you dismiss them. They were often just reporting what they saw. Now let's talk about tobacco, because tobacco is the one that most people actually associate with smoking, and its story is both more recent and more radical than everything we've covered so far. Tobacco is native to the Americas. That geographic fact matters enormously. It means tobacco was completely unknown to Europe, Africa, and Asia until contact with the Americas in 1492. When Columbus landed in the Caribbean, he encountered indigenous people doing something his crew had never seen before, walking around with small burning sticks, inhaling the smoke, exhaling it through their noses and mouths. Within weeks, members of his crew had tried it themselves, because of course they had. But here's what Columbus didn't know. Tobacco use in the Americas wasn't new, it was ancient. Chemical residues of tobacco have been found in ancient pipes from the southeastern United States dating back at least 3,500 years. And in 2019, researchers announced a discovery from a site in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah, a hearth dating back approximately 12,500 years, containing seeds of wild tobacco species concentrated in a way that suggested deliberate placement. Someone put them there. This pushed the confirmed timeline of human interaction with tobacco back by thousands of years, and it raised a question nobody has satisfactorily answered. If people were deliberately placing tobacco into fires 12,500 years ago, what were people doing with their local psychoactive plants in Africa, in Asia, in Europe at the same time? Because 12,500 years ago, humans were everywhere, and the desire to alter consciousness is not an American phenomenon. It is not a modern phenomenon. It is not even exclusively a human phenomenon. Ronald Siegel, a psychopharmacologist at UCLA, spent decades studying intoxication in animals, and what he found was that the pursuit of altered states is not something humans invented, it's something we inherited. Elephants will travel significant distances to reach fermented fruit. Reindeer in Siberia actively seek out and eat Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and then, when the psychoactive compounds through their systems into their urine, other reindeer drink that urine to get the same effect. Reindeer in Siberia have developed a drug recycling system. Take a moment to appreciate that. Siegel argued that the pursuit of altered states is a fourth drive, as fundamental to animal behavior as hunger, thirst, and sex. Not a flaw, not a deviation, a drive. If it's a drive, then the behavior of our prehistoric ancestors wasn't random or accidental. It was the expression of something that had been building in animal nervous systems for millions of years. For the indigenous cultures of the Americas, tobacco was not recreational. It was sacred. For thousands of years, across dozens of cultures across North and South America, tobacco was used in healing ceremonies, in communication with the spirit world, in binding agreements between communities, in the rituals that marked birth and death and war and peace. A shaman who smoked was not taking a break. He was opening a channel. The smoke itself was considered a living carrier, a messenger that traveled between worlds, carrying prayers upward and bringing visions downward. The idea of tobacco as a casual, everyday habit is an almost entirely European invention, and a recent one. Before smoking was recreational, there's strong evidence it was medical. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest surviving medical documents in the world, dating to ancient Egypt around 1550 BC, describes treatments involving the inhalation of smoke from heated herbs for conditions affecting the throat and lungs, which sounds, from a modern perspective, like exactly the wrong approach. But here's the thing, the specific herbs they used do have genuine pharmacological properties when inhaled, and the core insight that inhaling something gets it into the bloodstream faster and more directly than almost any other method, that insight has been continuously applied for at least 3,500 years. We still use it. Asthma inhalers, anesthetic gases, nebulizers. Ancient Indian Ayurvedic medicine, dating back more than 3,000 years, describes a practice called dhumapana, literally smoke drinking. Specific plants, specific conditions, specific preparations, specific protocols, not improvised. A sophisticated medical system with centuries of accumulated knowledge. In virtually every early civilization, Egypt, India, China, Greece, Mesopotamia, there is evidence of people deliberately inhaling smoke for therapeutic purposes, because it worked, often enough that the practice survived and was refined across generations. Now let's talk about something that gets almost no attention in discussions of ancient smoking: social bonding. Humans are intensely social animals. We evolved in groups, and group cohesion, the ability of a community to trust each other, coordinate behavior, maintain alliances, was literally a matter of life and death for most of our evolutionary history. Shared ritual is one of the most powerful tools for social cohesion that exists. When a group of people undergo the same experience together, especially an intense or altered experience, something happens neurologically. Oxytocin release, synchronized brain activity, a measurable increase in trust, in felt connection, in group identity. So when a group of our ancestors sat together in a small enclosed space, breathing in smoke from burning cannabis or other psychoactive plants, and collectively entered an altered state, that wasn't just recreation, that was technology, social technology. That was how you built the kind of deep, bone-level trust that allowed you to go into genuinely dangerous situations together and rely on each other completely. The ritual smoke circle wasn't just a party, it was ancient infrastructure. Now the oracle at Delphi, because this is a piece of the story almost nobody connects to the history of smoking, and it belongs here. The oracle at Delphi was the most famous and politically powerful religious institution in the ancient Greek world. It operated for roughly 1,000 years. Kings, generals, city-states traveled from across the known world to receive prophecy from the Pythia, the oracle who spoke the words of Apollo. For centuries, historians assumed this was theater, ritual with no biochemical reality behind it. Then in 2001, A geological survey of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi revealed that the temple was built directly over an intersection of two geologic fault lines. Those faults regularly released gases from the decomposing limestone beneath, primarily ethylene, a compound that at the right concentration produces feelings of euphoria, expansiveness, and disconnection from ordinary perception. The Pythia sat in an enclosed inner chamber directly over the fissure in the rock. She may have been, for the entire 1,000-year history of the oracle, involuntarily inhaling a psychoactive gas before delivering prophecy. The most politically influential institution in the ancient Greek world may have been powered by geological accident. The voice of Apollo may have been ethylene rising from a fault line. Whether you find that reductive or beautiful, and I find it genuinely, overwhelmingly beautiful, it illustrates something important. The human relationship with inhaled psychoactive substances is not a history of deliberate choices made by informed individuals. It is a history of encounters with the world that the world forced on us, that we learned from, that we ritualized, that we institutionalized, and that eventually became civilization. We didn't choose this relationship, we stumbled into it. Now let's get to the moment everything changed. Because when tobacco arrived in Europe in the late 15th century, it spread with a speed that should be very familiar to anyone living in the age of viral content. Within decades of Columbus's encounter with the Taino people, tobacco had crossed the Atlantic and was moving along trade routes with unstoppable momentum. By the 1700s, snuff was fashionable across European aristocracy. By the 1800s, cigars were everywhere. And then, in 1881, James Bonsack invented the cigarette rolling machine. A single machine could produce 120,000 cigarettes per day. The cost of production collapsed. The price collapsed with it. What had taken indigenous Americans thousands of years to develop into a careful, ritualized, spiritually grounded practice was turned into a mass-market consumer product in less than 4 centuries. By the 1950s, the evidence linking cigarettes to lung cancer was undeniable, and the tobacco companies knew, not suspected, knew. Their own internal scientists had confirmed it. And the decision was made to suppress it. What followed was one of the most sustained, deliberate corporate deception campaigns in history. Tobacco companies manufactured scientific doubt. They hired doctors to endorse their products. They added chemical compounds specifically designed to make nicotine hit faster and leave the system more quickly, maximizing craving, maximizing consumption. A shaman in 500 BC placing cannabis on hot stones to honor his ancestors. A tobacco executive in 1960 signing off on marketing cigarettes to teenagers. Both involve smoke. Nothing else is shared between them. So when did ancient humans start smoking? We'll probably never know exactly. What we can say, humans have been accidentally inhaling psychoactive smoke for as long as we've been building fires. Potentially 1 million years. Deliberate use of specific plants go back at least 12,500 years in the Americas, at least 2,500 years in Central Asia, and almost certainly considerably further in both cases. What is absolutely clear is that by the time the historical record begins anywhere in the world, humans were already finding ways to put smoke into their bodies. The specific plants changed, the rituals changed, the purposes changed, but the behavior was universal, and it was already ancient by the time anyone thought to write it down. The next time you smell a campfire, there's a reason it does something to you, something that feels older than your own memories, something that bypasses language and logic and goes directly to a part of you that is very, very old. That's not nostalgia, that's not sentimentality, that's millions of years of your ancestors gathering around fire in the dark and feeling, for a moment, safe. We didn't choose this relationship with smoke. We were born into it, long before we had words for what it was. Until then, pay attention to what you're drawn to, and ask yourself how old that pull really is. But I want to go one level deeper, because we've talked about the history, the archaeology, the anthropology. We haven't talked about what's actually happening in your brain when you smoke, and that story is the one that explains everything else. Nicotine, the primary psychoactive compound in tobacco, binds to acetylcholine receptors in the brain. Specifically, it triggers the release of dopamine, through what neuroscientists call mesolimbic pathway, the reward circuit, the same system that activates when you eat something delicious, when you connect deeply with another person, when you accomplish something genuinely difficult. The difference is speed and intensity. A cigarette delivers nicotine to the brain within seconds of the first inhale. The dopamine release is fast, reliable, and powerful, and then it fades. Within roughly 2 hours, nicotine levels drop enough to trigger craving, which means you smoke again, which means the behavior is reinforced, repeatedly, many times a day, every day. But here's what almost nobody talks about. Nicotine doesn't just make you feel good, it makes you feel focused, sharper, more capable of sustained attention. It is measurably genuine cognitive enhancer. Studies consistently show that nicotine improves reaction time, short-term memory, and sustained concentration in non-smokers. For people doing cognitively demanding work, the appeal of a substance that genuinely, measurably improves thinking, even temporarily, even with catastrophic long-term costs, is not irrational. It's not stupidity. It's a rational response to a real pharmacological effect. This is part of why writers, soldiers, artists, and scientists have historically smoked at elevated rates. The stereotype of the chain-smoking novelist or the cigarette-between-sentences philosopher isn't purely cultural. There's a pharmacological reality underneath it. The smoke isn't just pleasurable. It's associated with being sharper, with being more capable, with being the version of yourself that can handle things. And that association is extraordinarily hard to break, because when you quit, you're not just losing a source of pleasure, you're losing what feels like a cognitive tool, a coping mechanism, a piece of your functioning identity. This is why quitting is one of the genuinely hardest things a human being can do, and why framing it as simple weakness is not just wrong but cruel. The people who struggle to quit are fighting an addiction that operates simultaneously at the level of brain chemistry, cognitive function, emotional regulation, social identity, and ancient evolutionary drives. That's not a personal failure. That's a biological ambush engineered over decades to be as difficult to escape as possible. There's one more thing worth sitting with, something that connects the very beginning of this story to right now. When researchers study modern indigenous cultures that have maintained traditional tobacco practices, communities where tobacco is still used ceremonially, sparingly, with intention, the relationship with the plant looks completely different from what we see in industrialized smoking. These communities don't experience the same patterns of addiction. They don't smoke continuously throughout the day. They use tobacco at specific moments, for specific purposes, with specific rituals surrounding the use. And they stop, they put it down, and walk away. The substance is the same, the plant is the same, the nicotine is the same, but the context is so different that the experience, the relationship, the outcome is almost unrecognizable. This tells us something important. The epidemic of tobacco addiction that has killed hundreds of millions of people over the past century is not an inevitable consequence of humans encountering tobacco. It is the consequence of tobacco being stripped from its cultural context, industrialized, chemically manipulated, aggressively marketed, and deployed as a consumer product by people who understood exactly what they were doing and chose to do it anyway. The plant didn't do that, the industry did. And somewhere in that distinction lies something worth holding on to. The human relationship with smoke, with fire, with altered states, that relationship is ancient. In many of its historical forms, it's actually a story of community, of healing, of meaning-making, of connection to something larger than the individual self. What was done to that relationship in the 20th century is a separate story, a much darker one. One final thought, and this is the one I want you to carry with you after this video ends. Every time you sit around a bonfire, or catch a whiff of wood smoke on a cold night, or watch a candle flame and feel something you can't quite name, that feeling has a history, a very long one. Your ancestors gathered around fire for hundreds of thousands of years. They breathed its smoke, they felt its warmth, they told each other stories in its light, they buried their dead near it, they used it to hold the darkness back. The relationship between humans and fire, between humans and smoke, is not a metaphor. It is one of the oldest and most fundamental facts of what we are. Everything else, the tobacco industry, the cigarette machine, the warning labels, the The addiction came later, came on top of something that was already ancient when the first city was built. So when you ask when ancient humans started smoking, you're really asking something deeper. You're asking when humans first noticed that the world could change them, that breathing in could make the inside of their skull feel different, that the boundary between themselves and the rest of the world was more permeable than they'd assumed. And the answer, as best we can tell, is almost immediately, as soon as there was fire, as soon as there was something to breathe. We have never, in all of human history, been comfortable just existing in the world as it is without reaching for something that changes how it feels. That might be the oldest human trait of all.